Okay, welcome everyone to our October 16th KNPS program. And today's program is going to be on Western red cedar dieback and community science in the Pacific Northwest. And our guest speaker today is Dr. Joey Hulbert from Washington State University, stationed at the Research and Extension Center in Puyallup, Washington. So welcome, Joey, to our program. Let's see, if you're not a member, most of us are, but if you're not a member of KNPS, please join. I'll add that information into the chat coming up here. And not very expensive, supports our programs. Joey, you'll probably talk about the Pacific Northwest Citizens and Community Science Summit. I assume during your talk, so I won't announce that, but that's coming up on the 26th and 27th, and it's going to be it's free, and I think there's still room for registrants, people registering.
Yeah, you can register through Friday, and then that'll give us 1 week to get make sure we have everyone's correct contact details and things like that, prepping for the final event on the 26th and 27th. So
great, that would be good. That would be great. And we have George Gehring and I have a presentation or some sort of we're going to be involved in that summit. So that's going to be fun, and it'll be interesting to hear all of the people that are going to come and talk about citizen science in the Pacific Northwest. Okay, and our next fundraiser at the Idaho Port Authorities on October 21st through the 27th, and Cindy Hayes has got raffle tickets, and there will be raffle tickets there at the Idaho Port Authority. So please support us there and enjoy a brew or two. And then our November program on the 20th is going to be presented by Phil Huff. Phil, Executive Director of Friends of Scotchman Peak Wilderness, and he's going to give us an update on what's going on with the Friends and also with the wilderness itself, place we really cherish here in Bonner County. So look forward to that as well. Okay, so Dr. Joey Hulbert is a postdoctoral research fellow at Washington State University, as I mentioned. He has a background in forest health, and he can answer any of your questions about tree health issues, or he can answer many of them. And he's also the founder and director of Forest Health Watch, which you can look at their website and learn about that. And that's an initiative to make tree science accessible and provide opportunities to make meaningful contributions to accelerate research. And I think with that introduction, Dr. Hulbert, please share your screen and begin when you're ready.
Okay. Yeah. Are you with me on my
I see it.
Okay, great.
Good. Yeah.
Yes, it's really lovely to be here. Thanks so much for the opportunity, Preston, and thanks everyone for joining us on a Saturday morning. I do wish that we could be together in person. Maybe at a future event we can make that work. I was recently reached out to by the chapter in Moscow. I think it's a White Pine chapter, and they said they're hosting the kind of statewide field event next spring. So there might be an opportunity where we could all get together and look for some red cedar during that event. As Preston mentioned, there's also the Citizen Science Summit. So this, today we're talking about one program, but there's many programs and many projects in the Northwest that you all could contribute to if you feel like dedicating your time to advance knowledge and accelerate research. Preston also mentioned I'm currently the director of the Forest Health Watch. It's kind of a moving target. Right now, we're really focused on Western red cedar, but we'd love to hear your perspectives, especially your perspectives on what other forest health issues are affecting, say, white pine or whitebark pine, and how we can make a community science or a citizen science project around that together. There was some earlier discussion about white pine and whitebark pine, which is really great. And those are the just examples of the perspectives we really love to hear. And so I really encourage you to engage with me if there's an issue that you think needs more research, or an issue that you feel strongly about and would be willing to dedicate time towards testing a specific hypothesis or something like that. Preston, I did want to just quickly ask you how long, I forget, are we together for an hour or more than an hour?
An hour's fine.
Okay.
For that, yeah.
Yeah, so I'm gonna try and cover some things. I'm first just gonna introduce myself, and then we can talk about red cedar, and then I'll broadly introduce a little more about how you can engage with the Forest Health Watch, and then kind of showcase how people are involved as community scientists in the Forest Health Watch, particularly how they're accelerating research about the red cedar, in hopes that maybe yourselves would be interested in getting involved in the same way, which we would most certainly welcome. And I'm here if you have questions and things like that. And then at the end, we'll just talk about how that information that community scientists are collecting and sharing is going to help achieve research goals that will hopefully help us to ensure that red cedar remains on the landscape for future generations. And so I'll go through how that's specifically helpful. So before I begin, I want to acknowledge that I'm coming to you today from Tacoma and the traditional homelands of the Puyallup tribe of Indians. There's this pretty incredible tool called nativeland.ca where you can go and explore and see what traditional homelands or which territories you're occupying or visiting. So I encourage you to check out this tool. But I just feel really, really privileged to be working and learning in this beautiful area, which was kind of the traditional territories of many Coast Salish peoples in this Puget Sound region. And so I just want to acknowledge that I'm really privileged to get to explore and learn and study and have fun in this beautiful traditional lands. So real brief, I do want to say that I've kind of made a full circle back to the Cougs. I studied forestry at Pullman, which most of our field work and experiences out in the forest were actually in Idaho, which was really great. So I definitely have an appreciation for the region and where you all live and explore. After that, I went to Oregon State, and I completed a master's where I studied a tree disease called sudden oak death. And so that gave me some background into forest health. And I actually went to South Africa after that and studied the same group of microorganisms that cause this disease, but in their biodiversity hotspot called the Cape Floristic region by Cape Town. And so we are looking at plant disease in that biodiversity hotspot, which is pretty exciting. I fortunately made it back to the US in February 2020, just before everything started to lock down. And since then, I've been working in researching at the Research and Extension Center for WSU in Puyallup. There, I am supported by the USDA through a fellowship for my postdoc. And so I've been really lucky to have support from the USDA to start this Forest Health Watch program. And now we're trying to find ways to extend it and ensure that it continues. We also received some support from WSU through the McIntyre Stennis funding that they receive. So again, I'm coming to you today from Tacoma, but WSU has a research and extension center in the South Sound region. It's there in Puyallup, and we're again just super privileged to have this incredible place to do work. I'm part of a program called the Ornamental Plant Pathology. So we do a lot of stuff related to plant health. There's a lot of support for Christmas trees, and my mentor is really the Christmas tree disease expert in the Northwest. But here we also work with the organisms that cause diseases like sudden oak death, as you see here, and we try and work with ornamental plant nurseries to ensure that these diseases aren't having an impact on them, but also that they're not spreading these kind of diseases into our native environments. We also have some really cool research about madrone. I know madrone doesn't really grow in the inland Northwest, but it's a really iconic tree species to the Puget Sound. Actually grows from British Columbia to Mexico, but I just wanted to highlight that we have this common gardens type study where we have populations of Pacific madrone, 113 different families collected from throughout the range, growing in kind of 5 spots throughout the West Coast. So these we call a common garden, which essentially is just one species with a bunch of different populations in one area. So you can compare them and see which populations are best adapted to those climate or most resistant to a certain disease. Madrone gets these gnarly leaf blight every year, and so we're looking at that. And then the most recent thing that we started working on is a disease called sooty bark disease, and I'm going to talk a little bit more about that as we go, because it'd be really interesting to hear if you all ever see this or come across it. The final thing I was just going to highlight, this is a river in the eastern, well, it's on the east side of the Cascades, so it's central Washington. And we're busy looking for those Phytophthora species, the microorganisms that cause sudden oak death in these rivers. And so I just wanted to highlight that we may sometime want to come closer to you all and do this kind of research as well. But in any case, I just wanted to introduce myself so you know that I'm here as a resource. At a minimum, I can connect you with other people that are closer. But I'm certainly happy to answer and look for answers if there's tree health concerns that you have and you just have questions, you can contact me. So I'm going to switch now, and I'm going to talk about Western red cedar and why it's important, and then we're going to talk about what we're seeing with the dieback, and then we'll do a poll question just to hear from you all on whether that's something you're seeing. So I do like to really emphasize that Western red cedar is really important to you all and to us in Western Washington. It's really cool species that has a pretty substantial distribution in the Northwest, including the inland Northwest. We, truly appreciate Western red cedar because of the role it's played in the indigenous legacy in the Northwest. We've heard it be called the generous species, or Western red cedar is a really generous species because of all the gifts that it's provided to indigenous peoples in the Northwest. For example, Western red cedar is used for transportation and shelter and other things like textiles. And so basket weaving is still very important traditional practice that occurs today with bark of the Western red cedar. Western red cedar has also been called the tree of life by a bunch of different sources. Again, just illustrating how generous this species is in terms of the products and properties and services that it provides to peoples in the Northwest. And in some cases, it's referred to as the tree of life because you're using its products, or you're benefiting from this tree from the time that you're born to the time that you die. And so a little bit of traditional knowledge that was shared with me when I was given this cedar bundle is that if you dry a cedar bundle and you clip little pieces of it and drop it into boiling water, and that steam is actually good for treating respiratory issues or relieving respiratory symptoms. So that was a pretty neat piece of kind of medicinal use of red cedar that I never knew about. But I was cautioned that if you're going to do this, you should speak to a traditional healer about the amounts and quantities to use, because it's pretty powerful species. But in addition to the cultural importance of red cedar, it's also been a phenomenal part of our industrial heritage in the Northwest. And so I assume Sandpoint was a mill town at one point, probably, like a lot of these towns in the inland Northwest and the coast of Washington and the Puget Sound. For example, in Tacoma, our waterfront used to have 9 separate mills. Now it has, it still has a number of mills in the region, but Tacoma was really built on forestry, and red cedar was an integral component of that. And so this is a Ballard Lumber Company in Seattle, just showing all these cedar planks. Cedar shingles was another kind of really important product that we used red cedar for early on. So you would cover the roofs of your house with cedar shingles. But we really, we value red cedar because it's been recognized as this really durable species that doesn't decay and is pretty resistant to rot, relative to any other tree species. And so it's certainly the species we use for our fences and our decks and our raised garden beds or whatever wood products you're using that are exposed to the elements. So the endearing wood of the ages. Yeah, it's pretty incredible. Red cedar, they also live more than 1,000 years, and even when they fall onto the landscape, it still takes hundreds of years for them to decay. So they're pretty incredible in terms of the structure they provide. Red cedar, sometimes you'll find it in entirely dense, completely solitary stands of red cedar. And I'm kind of wondering if that's because there's a root rot present that's just taking out all the furs and other things over time. And red cedar is the only one that can survive. But it's really incredible when you do find these groves. And you really find a lot of red cedar along streams where they're providing important services like stabilizing the soil and the riverbanks, but also shading the stream so that the habitat is suitable for fish like salmon. So it's really important tree for those reasons. I'm over in Tacoma and Seattle where there's a lot of people, so we always like to talk about the role that they're playing in the urban forest as well. So if we just look at Seattle in their street tree database, so it's an openly accessible database where they've mapped all the trees along streets that are maintained by the Department of Transportation. But there's 1,600 red cedars spread out across Seattle. So it's a pretty substantial footprint in terms of the services and things that it's providing in the urban forest. And those services include things like reducing the heat island effects. So reducing the effect of or mitigating or lessening the effect of climate change on some of these communities. This is really important when we're thinking about things like the recent heat event in the Northwest and the heat dome. If you've experienced that or were part of it, I don't know if that affected Sandpoint as much. I would love to hear what you all thought about that. But yeah, there's a lot of really important values to trees in urban forests, and red cedar is occupying a pretty big footprint of that for many of our Northwest cities. So this is an example of the distribution and really the footprint of red cedar on our landscape. We know it goes from Alaska all the way down to California, but it goes as far east or as far east as western Montana, and clearly that northern Idaho area is a big part of the distribution of red cedar. And actually, some of the densest stands of red cedar, or some of the areas where you find the most basal area of red cedar, is actually in this northern Idaho area. So although it's, iconic tree here, it's the provincial tree of British Columbia, but it's really, really an important species in northern Idaho as well. So just to summarize, Western red cedar is really important because of the role it's played in the cultural legacy of the region, as well as the industrial heritage of cities like Sandpoint and Seattle and Tacoma, but also because of the ecological services that it's providing in both urban and natural areas. And so, to further illustrate this, and the reason we need to figure out why and how we can keep this on the landscape for future generations is because it has a really robust distribution, and we're looking at, a pretty big gap being filled or opening if we're in fact losing Western red cedar. So there's a lot of concern because this tree is really important. And the reason that we're concerned is because we're starting to see a lot of tree dieback. So sometimes we'll see mature trees die outright, and sometimes you just see the crown very thin and easy to see through compared to the other trees around it. Sometimes you'll see the top die, and then over time it just slowly progresses. Sometimes it's in the middle of a forest, and sometimes it's out on the edge. But so these are some classic examples of what we're seeing on the west side, where you really see this top dieback. The trees get very thin. One thing to note is that these all have their really fine branches still, so it's just indicating that this is a really recent dieback. Sometimes you'll just see the spike tops on like a really mature, old growth red cedar, and it just has this spike top, and all the fine branches have fallen off. So that occurred maybe 10 years ago or longer. It's been occurring for a long time. But what's concerning is that we're seeing all these medium, large, small trees with very recent top dieback. And so here's some examples from Portland. And these are some examples around Seattle. And these are some examples in Vancouver, British Columbia. So I just wanted to illustrate that it's occurring at least throughout the west side, from Oregon to Vancouver and beyond. And we're really getting an understanding of that distribution because of individuals like Radu, who are community scientists sharing their observations. It's also really highlighted, the concern is growing because we keep seeing articles about this dieback, dead tree after dead tree, the case of Washington. A few of these are based out of Vancouver and British Columbia, where again, red cedar is their provincial tree. The dieback's also been noted by the Forest Service in collaboration with the state agencies like Washington Department of Natural Resources, where every year they fly airplanes over our forested areas, and they map where they're seeing health issues. And so in 2017, they started mapping the dieback of red cedar. And every year since then, they've noticed more and more. Generally, the consensus is that this is driven by longer and hotter droughts in the region, and that makes pretty good sense on a simple term, because we know red cedar is a water-loving species. But it's more complex than that, because you would expect it to be worse in, say, somewhere like Oregon, where it's in fact warmer than, say, British Columbia or Alaska. But it is occurring throughout the range, and so there's a few things like that are still making us scratch our heads a little and use caution before we say that climate change is killing red cedar. And in addition to that, there's this sense of urgency. So there's growing concern. We know it's really important, but we know we need to find information and solutions quickly, because people are already deciding to plant other tree species instead. And urban cities and other foresters and small forest landowners are always asking, what should I plant instead? Or in some cases, people are already saying, I'm doubting their success and I've chosen other trees to plant on our property. So if we want to keep Western red cedar on our landscapes for future generations, because it's got this really important cultural relevance, and also, it provides products that are distinct that we use every day in our homes. We need to find other solutions and explore other issues. Sorry, was the vacuum? I forgot. I should have encouraged my partner not to use the vacuum. Hopefully it wasn't too bad and you could hear me okay. So I think at this point, it's good to launch a poll question and just ask you if you've seen, I can go back to this, have you seen anything like this, or have you seen anything else that's also indicative of tree health issues? So I think I can launch this. So yeah, if you have a minute, and it's okay if you haven't seen this, we want to know where trees are healthy and in addition to where trees are unhealthy. And I'm going to go into what we're seeing so far. And to be honest, our understanding of what the condition of red cedar in northern Idaho is very, very poor, because we haven't been able to engage with that many communities. So your perspectives are super important, and we'd love to work with you, especially because it's an enormous gap in our knowledge of what's going on with Western red cedar. But let's see, I think there's just, give it another minute. There's 4 folks who haven't participated, but I guess if you're on a telephone, you might not be able to. Okay. So this is pretty good. It's a pretty good response from, it's sad to hear that 60% of you have seen the dieback of red cedar, or at least some concerns for red cedar health. But yeah, I appreciate that you all were honest and answered that, it's fine if you're not sure. That's what the purpose of this webinar is about, right? So it does sound like there is some dieback of red cedar in the region. And I'd love to hear a little more about please elaborate in the chat if you'd like. I see Patty's made a comment that around Spirit Lake is some of her trees that they've planted. So those must have been pretty small trees. Is that correct, Patty? Because you planted 25 trees 2 years ago. Yeah.
Yes. Yes. We planted 90 different trees, 25 for red cedar. 90 different trees, 25 for red cedar. They did well the first year. This year they all died. I don't know if it was because of the drought.
Okay. Yeah. Yeah, it will be interesting to know more. If you want to follow up with me, maybe we can brainstorm some other possible causes, but that does sound pretty terrible. We are seeing dieback of some small trees and things like that. So it's possible. Red cedar is also known to be a tree where they have trouble with establishment, and it's usually when you restore a landscape and you plant red cedar versus Doug fir or some of the others, it's usually the one that has the most mortality after restoration. So it's kind of a finicky species early on. So there's a lot of other factors that might have contributed or explained that, but yeah, that would be sad if it's relevant to the drought and climate. And so I'd be happy to chat more about that. But thanks for sharing. I encourage you, anyone else, if there's specific areas that you've noted they're really bad, please share it in the chat, and please feel free to ask questions. I'll try and incorporate them as we go, but I can talk a lot, so I should just try and move through this, and then we can have more of a discussion. So I'm going to shift and just spend a couple minutes talking about Forest Health Watch. So now we've talked about red cedar, the importance of red cedar, the concerns we're seeing, and the need for research quickly because of the decisions that are already being made. And so now I'll talk about how people can get involved and help share that and accelerate that information. But first, I'll introduce this overall program, Forest Health Watch, and then we'll talk about how community scientists are contributing to the red cedar dieback issue. So as Preston mentioned, please visit our website, foresthealth.org, for a little bit more info in here. There's a lot of ways you can engage with us. I'll highlight that I have these office hours every month where we're just dedicated time towards answering questions and things like that. Not very well attended, so there's lots of opportunity to come and pick my brain about anything. We have office hours, questions and answers about tree health, and then we have office hours for how to use iNaturalist and things like that. We also do monthly research updates, so that would look a lot different than this, where we actually just look at the information that's being shared by community scientists, and we talk about some of the patterns and some of the things, and we really discuss how it can be improved. And then I try and be really transparent about how that information is going to be used and how we're going to analyze it. So I encourage you to if you're interested in staying in touch, we do a research update every month. So we're really focused on Western red cedar, and this slide is really old, but we've got like 1,200, almost 1,200 observations of red cedar. But I just wanted to highlight that we did start some other projects, so that if you see a dying big leaf maple or Douglas fir, we can map it as well, then try and do the same kind of approach to understand where trees are healthy and where they're unhealthy. So we're really focused on Western red cedar dieback, but we also hear a lot about Western hemlock dieback. And so I would love to hear your perspectives on that. Is this a concern? What are you seeing? Sometimes it's like a top dieback, and sometimes we'll see the lower foliage die. And so it does kind of seem like a little bit different story than the red cedar. Grand fir dieback's probably relevant to you all. You might see a lot of fir engraver and other firs dying in the region. And we gave a presentation to Montana, and they said that there's kind of a big spike in fir dieback and probably related to the fir engraver or some beetle. But we're very interested in big leaf maple dieback, and there was just this past week or 2 weeks ago, there was a study out of UW, that University of Washington, that linked this dieback to hotter and longer droughts. But we're curious about the role of this fungus called sooty that causes a disease called sooty bark disease. And so it's known to be an endophyte that can live inside of trees, but as trees become stressed and the climate becomes more favorable for the fungus, it's kind of emerging as an issue in the Northwest, at least in Seattle and the West side. But I should note that this fungus and this disease was first noted in Washington, in Pullman, in 1968. So if it's made it to the West side since then, it's probably made it to Sandpoint. But it's really characterized by this kind of sooty, the bark will pop off and you'll have this really black residue underneath the bark. Just want to be clear. Sometimes it kind of looks like this patchy, the the fungal spores turn this gray after they've kind of been released. And depending on what tree you're looking at, the symptoms look a little different. But the most distinctive thing to keep an eye out for is that it's underneath the bark. If you see black on the outside of the bark, it's not something that you should be concerned with, I don't think. But if you see the bark is popping off and there's this black kind of paste underneath, then we would love to know, because we're trying to understand the extent and what trees are affected. We're also seeing some dieback of red alder on the west side. It's another water-loving species, so it might just be a stream permanence or water permanence issue where streams are drying out faster and the trees are going longer without. But we're also concerned that there might be a root disease associated with this, maybe something new. So that's why we're interested in knowing where you see healthy red alder and where you don't, and where you see unhealthy red alder. I do want to highlight that through the Forest Health Watch, we also do training events. They're really just presentations and discussions online, but we have one on Monday about biosurveillance. So this is really where we focus on invasive insects and diseases that are affecting our forests and things to watch out for. But we're also doing these information sessions on sooty bark disease. And so if you really want to know more about that, there's one of those coming up in November. I'm going to skip past the next two slides. We have a specific hypothesis that we're testing in relation to these heat maps that the county of King County in Washington produced. So they mapped the surface temperature, and we're interested in testing a specific hypothesis that red cedars are less healthy in areas with hotter temperatures. And so we've specifically picked trees and asked people to go to these specific trees at different heat levels in order to test that hypothesis with a community science approach. So I just wanted to highlight that as an example. We could do something like that around your communities. If you wanted to work together and think of a hypothesis, we can launch something like that with you all too. And then we have target areas to go and visit. For example, it'd be fun to test whether red cedar are less healthy on seasonal streams compared to permanent streams, and really test that hypothesis that it's stream permanence is kind of the issue, where if streams dry out sooner, those trees are more vulnerable. So we could talk about that more, but for the sake of time, I'm going to just keep going. So this next bit, I'm just talking about how community scientists are getting involved. And so we use a project on iNaturalist. In this project, we worked with some folks from the state agencies and the Forest Service who have they picked up on this before us, and they developed a project on Survey 123. So if you have access to ArcMap online, they have kind of a more robust tool, but they designed it for people within their agency to use. And then we worked with them to extend that effort to the broader public through iNaturalist, and we're collecting it in a little bit different way, but we essentially worked with them to team up and try and collect faster and broader information about red cedar. And so we chose iNaturalist because there's already almost 4 million people using this tool, and it's completely open, which is cool. So the information that you share will go to our project if you're interested in contributing, but also, that will feed into all the observations that are being shared in Bonner County. Other researchers that are interested in those observations in the future will have access to that information. So you're not just putting data into a black box, you're putting it there for anyone to use. I should also say that you can choose to disclose the location and you can blur the location if you're concerned about sharing observations within your property. And you can choose to trust our project so that we can get the exact coordinates, but the public can't. Those are just some examples in case you were had that reservation. But another neat thing about iNaturalist is it's once you've made one project, it's really easy to make another project that complements it. So that's how we're able to make projects for bigleaf maple and western hemlock and things like that. I don't know why this is okay. So generally how it works is you can take a picture of any organism and you share it online, and that community helps you identify what you saw. They confirm or deny that you identified it correctly. So it's a good way to learn new, if you want to, it's a great way to like figure out what something is if you don't know already, but it's also a neat way to document those rare species that you might be interested in kind of documenting. In some cases, if you find something that's really rare or threatened, Washington Department of Natural Resources has followed up with people. Washington Fish and Wildlife responded recently to someone who shared a salamander on the Olympics that they thought was extinct, and then, or maybe not extinct, but they had very limited distribution. So then they worked with that individual to go and do more robust monitoring in that area. So I'm gonna, let's see, before I go on, there's one more poll question. Just have you used iNaturalist? So if you all would be willing to engage with us one more time, we'd love to know if you've ever used iNaturalist. I should note that you don't have to use it on your phone. You can just take a picture and then later add it on your computer. And there's even a way to do like batch importing. So you could, go on a hike, take 100 pictures and then come back and upload them all at once. I haven't explored that much, but it's definitely a possibility. But this is really incredible. We'll give it one more second. But most of you have indicated that you have used it. So that's awesome. Again, this just illustrates that I'm talking to a really incredible group, and I really am appreciative of this opportunity to engage with you all. For those of you who haven't used it, that's quite all right. It's funky. It's kind of difficult to figure out the first time you use it, but then once you got it down, it's pretty quick. It just takes that initial, but it's also a smartphone device, and not everyone is there and uses smartphones regularly, and I respect that. And so that's why I encourage you to try uploading from your computer if you're interested. So yeah, 73% of you, 11 of us indicated that they have used iNaturalist. That's awesome. That to me says that we chose the right tool for this. So we use it a little bit differently. If you go on iNaturalist and you search red cedar, there's 13,000 observations or more or something like that. There's a lot. But the problem is we don't know if that's a healthy tree or an unhealthy tree. So we created a specific project that you join, and then you add an observation, and then you answer a question. Is it healthy or unhealthy, kind of thing? So the way it works is you would join the project. This is kind of what it looks like from your computer desktop, and this is what it looks like on the app. So if you're adding once you've joined the project, then when you add a picture of red cedar, you click projects and you tag the red cedar project. And when you do that, there's a couple questions that these bold ones are required. And then there's a few more optional ones. So the questions that we ask is, what did you see? Is the tree healthy? Did you see the crown was thinning or really easy to see through? Did you see the top had died, or was the tree completely brown? So Patty, it'd be interesting, to document those unhealthy trees. And then we also asked, there's optional questions about the site. Is the tree right next to a road, or is it out in the middle of a field, or is it in a forest? Right? So we're really looking for patterns. Are trees that are out in the middle of fields more vulnerable than others? And this is a slight tangent, but this is an irrigated golf course. So these trees are getting water throughout the summer, but they're still dying. So this is another reason that we're like scratching our heads about, is this solely climate, or is there something else going on? So another thing we ask is, did you see any other factors that might explain why the trees are dying? So we asked you to look and see if there's a fungus or insects or bark beetles. So armillaria is one of the pathogens that affects our forests, and it's natural. It's been here as long as these trees, but it seems like with trees drying out, they're becoming more vulnerable to these native pathogens. So this example where we recently found a little patch of dying red cedar, then sure enough, we were able to find this kind of white fungus, armillaria, growing on that cedar. Other times you might see beetle frass or beetle holes. This is like sawdust that is a beetle excrement. Other times you might see these beetle galleries, and these are pretty cool. Based on the pattern of the gallery, you can identify what insect it is. They each kind of have their own patterns. It's pretty neat. So yeah, bark beetles, there's a cedar bark beetle. It doesn't seem like it's driving this, but there might be some association. And so it's important to document where we're seeing it or not. Sorry, I haven't quite got through the chat. I'm just pushing through this for a few more minutes, and then we can have a good discussion if there's time. So we do have 2 dashboards on our website, and I'm just gonna see if this will, did you switch with me to my browser?
Yes, we did.
Okay, great. Thank you, Preston. So this updates every day on its own. You can go foresthealth.org/analyses to get there. But you can see kind of who's contributing, how many observations have been shared. We're hoping to get to 2,020 observations by the end of the year. We'll see if we get there. But you can see that our coverage in Northern Idaho is very, very limited. And so right now our understanding of the health of trees in this region is very poor. I don't quite know, is red cedar in having health issues like we're seeing on the west side, or is it very limited? So you can see that we really, really need community scientists like yourselves to help us understand what's going on with red cedar in that region. Down below is another dashboard where you can look at the actual health categories. And so of the ones that are shared out here, most of them are healthy, which is great. But occasionally some have this thinning canopy, and I guess some are completely dying, or they have browning canopy. So that's kind of what we're seeing be shared out of Idaho at this time. A lot of these are from Moscow area. But yeah, not a single observation from around here. But you can see that this information is really giving us a nice kind of understanding of what's going on, at least in Western Washington. And you're welcome to go and explore this. It updates every day on its own. So this is really a really cool dashboard that was a volunteer helped us create from the iNaturalist data. So the last couple of minutes, I'm just going to highlight how sharing observations of red cedar to these projects is helpful. One, it's giving us a good understanding of the distribution of where trees are healthy and where they're not. So before we started this, we didn't really understand that it was such an issue in Vancouver, or we kind of did because all the news sources, but this is really giving us a better understanding of where the hot spots are and things like that. It's also, there's a number of questions that are helping us look at patterns. For example, the highest proportion of trees with dead tops seem to be in areas that are well drained. And so we're starting to get these like understanding of the patterns that are coming out of the citizen science data. And I encourage you to tune into one of those research updates to look at this data a little closer. So it's also helping us identify the most important environmental parameters. So we have that consensus. There's general understanding that this is linked to longer and hotter droughts. I think longer and hotter droughts are going to affect every tree in the region, but red cedar seems to be the first to literally feel the heat of climate change, if you will. But we need to really empirically test that and link it more closely with this. So the way that we're going to approach the iNaturalist data is we're going to do some modeling, say we can do a binary regression where we have tree is healthy or tree is unhealthy, a 1 or a 0, if you will. And then we can pull in some predictors and see which predictors are the best at predicting whether that tree is healthy or not. So we can look at environmental predictors, and we can look at topographic, like where on the landscape they are, and we can also look at soils. And what's cool is just from a GPS point and knowing if that tree is healthy or unhealthy, we can then take that GPS point and download all these other data. So I'm going to go into the environmental predictors a little bit more, and we can talk about this. So there's a really cool tool called the seed lot selection tool. And the way this works is, as you say, I want to plant a red cedar on the tip of the Olympics. And it says, okay, great. What climate do you want that red cedar to be best suited for? And so you can actually say, I want this to be the best suited for the climate that's projected for this area between 2041 and 2070. So I want to plant a red cedar there that's going to do well in 20 years from now. And so it says, okay, great, cool. You're talking about red cedar. And now, what environmental parameter, what climate variable do you want to base that decision on? And so here you have this selection where at this point we have to guess, kind of. I mean, some of you might have an indication that one of these is going to be a better predictor than others, but what we really need is to test and see which one of these is the most important to make this decision on. So that's what we're doing. So for example, you can say, I want to pick the best seed source for this site based on annual temperature, mean annual temperature. So it says, okay, great. Based on mean annual temperature values that are projected for this site, we recommend getting red cedar from this Willamette Valley area where it's dark red. Oops, what just happened? So this is where we were, sorry. So this is based on mean annual temperature. It says Willamette Valley. But if you switch this and you say, I want to do it based on precipitation, mean annual precipitation, then it says, oh, actually, you should get your seeds from either the Cascades or from the Coast Range of Oregon, or anywhere in the Cascades. So depending on the environmental parameter you pick or this climate variable, you're going to get different suggestions. So what we hope to do with the red cedar data that's being shared is identify which one of these variables is the best to use for picking this seed source. So we can do that because there's some incredible tools out there, like this Climate NA tool made by a professor at UBC, where it downscales all these climate projections. So you just put in a GPS point and it tells you kind of the projected or the historical climate data for that point. So with all of this information, we can start to look at things like, is there differences in heat, summer heat moisture for trees that are healthy versus trees that are dead? And so this is where we are now. We're just starting to explore this, but it's really cool to see how this community science data can be and will be really useful for keeping red cedar healthy and ensuring that we're planting it. And the final thing is, once we know where trees are vulnerable and once we know where which parameters or which predictors are the best for determining if that tree is going to be healthy or not, then we can start to screen other populations. So we can look and see, are trees from Montana or northern Idaho better suited in this location than, say, trees from Oregon or California? We need to start doing those comparisons before we really give up on red cedar and plant other species. So together is really the best way, the best approach to try and find these solutions. We need to work together and accelerate the breadth and the depth of what we're seeing and where we're looking. And so this sense of urgency is really the merit behind the community science, is that the more people involved, the faster we can find these solutions. So that's our summary into this, and I really can't emphasize enough that you all are the exact audience that we want to reach, and we'd love to hear your perspectives. So thanks for your time today, and I do want to invite you to share your feedback if you're willing. We'd love to know, was this interesting, or did we get something wrong, or what is your hypothesis? What should we be looking at? Any feedback would be more welcome, and you can do that on our website, foresthealth.org/share. So yes, thanks so much for having me, and I'm going to look at this chat and we can spend some time together having more of a discussion. Yeah, thanks for the kind words that some of you are sharing with me. So it sounds like Spirit Lake and Priest Lake, maybe there's some red cedar dying in those regions. The policy of the Forest Service to plant several species rather than cedar. Yeah, maybe, their approach to climate change is that things are changing quickly, so we don't want to plant trees that are max succession species. And so Molly mentioned, that they're planting more seral species, the early kind of establishers. Maybe they're hoping that red cedar will just come in naturally under those seral species, certainly for responding to a fire or trying to restore an area that's been degraded. You probably want something that will establish quickly, and so red cedar might not be the best for that. But is there any pattern in the landscape with the dieback? So we are just kind of at this point where there's enough observations that have been shared that we can really start to look at that data and start these analyses. And so we're going to look at some topographic things. From a GPS point, you can collect information about the slope and the aspect, like the direction the slope is facing. And you can also use that to calculate things like heat load index. And so we'll look and see if there's certain aspects where trees are worse, if there's, is elevation an important factor? We'll definitely start to look for those landscape patterns now. And I encourage you, if you're interested in staying in updates, Preston, staying updated, then come to the research updates. But yeah, stay tuned. We'll have a more rigorous analysis of that starting soon. Someone's asked me if like green, when you see a green algae bloom, is that possibly related to tree disease? And I think that's a good question. I don't think the algae in the lake per se are affecting the trees, but there's closely related species like Phytophthora is more closely related to a brown algae than it is to a fungus, but it behaves like a fungus, except that it can produce swimming spores. And so I'm wondering if you see an algae bloom, you're also seeing, if I doubt they're a bloom or something, but I haven't heard of a link between green algae blooms and tree health. But I suspect that if that algal bloom is because of warmer climate rather than, say, the accidental introduction of fertilizer or something, then that's probably an indicator that the system is changing, and you could expect to see some effects of tree diseases in a similar way. I don't know. So Phillips commented they agree with Molly about the Forest Service planting white pine, larch, and ponderosa. Yeah, so the Forest Service is mandated to restore habitat and to really try and focus on protecting endangered species and things like that. So they may not be that interested in red cedar. And I think that's somewhere that we could maybe help, is that if we could document why red cedar is important in terms of habitat, then maybe that red cedar would be more incorporated into the portfolios and the plans for reaching those objectives of habitat. But I think there's a big kind of gap there where we don't have a good understanding of red cedars, the value of red cedar in terms of habitat. For example, elk browse and things like that might be a priority, or that might, in which case red cedar is really good for, at least it seems to get chowed by elk a lot, but it might not really help reach that objective that well. I don't know. I recently went on a tour with the Forest Service where they purchased some land from Weyerhaeuser, or they inherited it. And so it's mostly Douglas fir plantations, and restoring red cedar into that system is not at all involved in part of that discussion, because that's apparently not needed to create old growth like spotted owl habitat, things like that. So it's a good discussion. I'd love to hear your suggestions on how to do that, or I see Paul's noted that there's an exception in Bottom Canyon where they're planting red cedar. Yeah, I welcome any of you to turn on your mic and ask questions as well. I know it's after the hour. I'm sorry that I went so long, but I'm happy to stick around if you got time to ask some more questions. So a lot of good discussion about some local kind of restoration projects and forestry. I would love to hear more about that. Yeah. Hi, Preston. Feel free to interrupt. Yeah. Or let me know how you'd like to move forward.
I'm kind of curious about why there's so few observations of western red cedar in North Idaho. And you probably can't answer that question, but maybe those of us who live here would have some idea about that.
So I do think there's a lot of observations on iNaturalist. They're just not with our specific project. And I think this is a example of what I need to do more. And I would love to reach more communities in Idaho like yourselves. And so this is, maybe I've just been really slow to connect with folks like yourselves. And that's why we haven't seen much engagement around Idaho yet. So yeah, I would welcome other opportunities. If there's other community groups in the area that you think would be interested in this, please connect us so we can meet more individuals like yourselves. Yeah.
Yes, it could be that just people don't know how to link to a project and then upload their observations to that project.
Yeah, I think it's an awareness thing. like, no, there's not many people in Idaho that are aware of the Red Cedar project. But it could also be that there's just not that many iNaturalist users. We can look at so if you explore Western Red Cedar, you'll see there's a lot of observations. There's 13,000. You can go to this map. So, right, this is all the areas where red cedar's been observed in northern Idaho. They just haven't been shared with our project. Some of these might be, this one's pretty recent. So Priest Lake, this person just wasn't aware of the project. Some of these may have been shared before our project was going, like 2 years ago, from Bonner County. So it's a good question. I would love to hear your perspective. How can I reach more of these folks in northern Idaho and raise awareness about this project? But also, how can I support you all so that you have the know-how and the tools to go, if you do want to contribute to this project, you can.
Joey, it might be something that we can, as a Native Plant Society, offer training to people here to encourage them to use iNaturalist and link to your project. That's something we locally could get involved with.
I would be very thrilled if you were willing to help in that regard. I certainly don't want to add more work to anyone's. We don't have that expectation at all, and we could do another training, like how to use iNaturalist, if that would be helpful, and specifically go into some of those. We do have an office hour where I'm there every month to answer questions, and then a lot of people just email me questions about iNaturalist, and so any of those options we're there to support. But it would be the best thing would be if you can get together as a group and try and get, learn to do this together.
Maybe if you put your email address in the chat for everybody to get access to, that would be great.
Awesome.
Thank you. That's great. Yeah.
And
so most of that information about your the events that you have and the stuff is on the Forest Health Watch website.
I think you can do. We can just even do just events, and you'll find stuff. But I think if you scroll to the bottom of the homepage, it'll have the most recent, the most upcoming kind of on there. I see Preston has shared the Community Science Summit, where there'll be a lot more discussion about iNaturalist on there. So there's a couple other good questions I want to get to. So Preston asked the group if anyone's seen the dieback near Ross Creek or Roosevelt Grove. So I don't know. You're welcome to turn your mic on and comment. Carol asked if heart rot could be related to the dieback. That's such a good question. We haven't really looked at that. There's a group out of Pullman that did core some trees this summer. So they might be able to answer that a little better, like which trees. Some of the difficulty with red cedar is it's really hard to age because they do have that heart rot often. So you can't core all the way to the center and count the rings all the time. So I love that question. It's something we haven't looked at. It'd be interested to know, if you're going to cut your red cedar because it's in bad shape, did it have heart rot or not? maybe we could do like a community science project around that question. It's something we haven't connected. It's just something that's difficult to assess without either tree cores or cutting the tree, right? But it could be that trees with substantial heart rot are the ones that are in worse shape. Because I do suspect that internal wood is important for transporting water and adding some strength, but it's the kind of the outer rings, right, that are the healthiest, that might be contributing most to the water flow. I don't know. That's a great question. Just thinking out loud. Shauna agrees it's good. It would be cool to do a field trip and learn and work together to add to the database. So appreciate that support, Shauna. I got another direct message that's asking if we ever work with kids and use this as an option, like a tool to teach about the importance of conservation. And that's something we want to do a lot more of, but we've only done very limited amounts because of COVID. But that was our initial plan, is to have a lot more educational opportunities for youth and go out and look at these things together. And so we have a couple of discussions with like local, we did some engagement with the Muckleshoot Indian tribe, which is kind of close to us, close to Mount Rainier, but then we have a relationship with the high school and one of the other schools in Tacoma, but that's about it. We did want to come out to the Kalispell at one point. They have really cool kind of education center, that I think is new. I think it's called Deer Creek, but so it's close to you all, but definitely not local. But I would be interested if you wanted to set something like that up. We could certainly do it virtually, but it might be possible to make a weekend trip out and do an educational hike like that.
Joey, do you see any seasonal aspects to the dieback? These are evergreen, so I mean, it could happen any time of year, I suppose. But
yeah, so that's such a good question. So right now, there's a lot of folks we have to constantly correct folks who see this for the first time and assume it's the tree's unhealthy. But you're right, this is the seasonal kind of flush of the older foliage that we see on red cedar at this time of year. But this is healthy, although 3 or 4 people have said that it's much worse this year than they've seen before. But right now we didn't have a good way to quantify that beforehand, but that'd be an interesting question. But if you see kind of the older needles dying, don't be alarmed. It happens every season. But if it does seem like, if you go back to that tree and it's really easy to see through compared to what it should look like or what neighboring trees look like, then maybe that's an indication that it did lose more foliage than it normally would have, and it's very thin. I think that's one way that red cedar tries to kind of acclimate and deal with reduced moisture availability, is it will just shed some of its needles. But if you see this browning on the tip or the outer needles, then that's more of a concern. Then it's like that whole branch is dying, and that could be indicative of the dieback that we're seeing. But it's a good question. It seems like, I mean, if the consensus that it's related to longer and hotter droughts, then it seems like you would kind of see a spike at the end of summer, or this time of year. We're not really seeing that on like the number of observations that are shared or anything, but that's a really good question.
I think
go ahead.
Go ahead. I think we're people are starting to drift off, but if you're out this way at any point, up this way, please contact us, me, so we can arrange some sort of a meeting to possibly get a group together and go out.
That would be lovely. Yeah.
Yeah, if you
I'd
have
like to do that. And I think, you know, if there's an opportunity to engage with you in the kind of the statewide get together, if that happens in the Moscow area, I think that would be lovely too, because then we can have maybe a bigger group of folks together. But keep me in mind, and let's stay in touch. I'm really hoping to put my roots down really deep and make this a career. So this could be the start of a relationship, and I'd be happy to circle back with you all after, you know, 6 months from now, when we have more analyses and a better representation of what's going on in Idaho, and just follow up at some point too. That would be great.
That'd be great. That would be great. I think people are needing to go now, Joey, and anyone who's left, everybody, just, you can unmute, and let's thank Joey for a great presentation, and something we need to be aware of, watch for.
Yeah, thanks for this opportunity.
Thank you.
Thanks,
Yeah, thank you very much.
Okay, everyone. Have a good day. I mean, it's going to be sunny over here, and enjoy being out on a beautiful October day.
Yeah. Thanks for spending your Saturday morning with me.
Thanks, Joey. We'll be in touch and see you at the summit.
Awesome. Looking forward to it. Thanks, Preston.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye.